Everyone knows the rules. Don't touch the guard. Don't stand too close. Don't wave your hand in front of his face, don't fake trip into him, don't whistle, don't clap. Near his ear, don't do the thing where you mime pulling a string attached to his bearskin cap. Everyone knows. And, basically, every single year, every April the 1st, like clockwork, like a disease with a calendar, somebody does it anyway. They think it's a gap in the system. A loophole dressed up as tradition. Plus, he can't react. He's not allowed. That's the whole point of him. They pull out their phones before they've even finished the thought, already composing the caption, already tasting the likes. What I guess they don't understand, what nobody standing outside those iron gates has ever truly understood, is that still is not the same as absent. He is watching you. Plus, he has always been watching you. And, on the morning of April the 1st, in the year I'm about to describe, one man found that out in a way that did not make it onto his Instagram. It made it into a formal incident report instead. I was the one who filed it. This is what I saw. The morning started the way April mornings always start outside Buckingham Palace, grey, damp, faintly smelling of bus exhaust and someone's forgotten McDonald's bag plastered against the gate railing. I think I'd my clipboard. I always have my clipboard. My supervising officer, Chief Warrant Officer Dalton, once told me I'd carry that clipboard into my own funeral and ask someone to sign for the flowers. He wasn't wrong. It's a habit I developed my first month on observation duty. Log everything, log it twice, because the day you don't log something is the day it becomes the only thing that matters. 0843 hours. I wrote that down. The tourist arrived at 0843. I noticed him the way you notice a wasp at a picnic, not because he did anything immediately alarming, but because something in his movement was wrong. He was in his mid-30s, American from the shoes alone, wearing a jacket that said London 2019 in the font of a man who'd bought it in the airport. He had 3 friends with him. They were hanging back near the railings with their phones already raised, which told me everything I needed to know about what was about to happen and absolutely nothing about how to stop it. The guard at post that morning was Trooper Marcus Webb. I knew Webb. Not well. Observation staff and ceremonial detail don't exactly share a canteen, but well enough. He'd been at the palace gates for 11 months. Before that, 2 tours. He didn't talk about the tours. He didn't talk about much, actually. He was, one of those men who seemed to have decided somewhere around age 22 that silence was load-bearing, that if he stopped being quiet something structural would give way. He stood at 6'1" in his bearskin, which brought him to roughly 6'5", and he was the absolute stillness you see in old photographs of men who have stood in front of things that wanted to kill them and simply didn't move. The kind of tourist positioned himself approximately 18 inches to Webb's left. His friends' phones went up. I wrote 0844, subject approaching post. Tourist group. 4 individuals. Plus, camera-ready formation. The tourist did the face thing first. You know the face thing. The exaggerated mime of looking directly at the guard, then, slowly turning to look at his own friends, mouth wide in theatrical disbelief. Can you believe this guy? Plus, the friends laughed on cue. Passing Japanese couple paused, looked, decided this was not their problem, and moved on. Webb did not blink. I logged, guard maintaining post discipline. Nominal. Plus, then, the tourist pulled out the horn. A small, plastic, red and yellow party horn. The kind you get in a multi-pack at a pound shop. He'd brought it from home, which he'd planned this. He stood approximately 8 inches from Webb's left ear and blew it. The sound was, I wrote this down, I'm not editorializing, aggressively stupid. A sound with no purpose on earth other than to exist in a video. Webb did not move. The tourist blew it again, longer this time. The friends were losing their minds. One of them had started recording vertically, then switched to horizontal, a man torn between instinct and craft. I'd my pen to be fair, onto the clipboard and I was not writing. I was watching Webb's jaw. There's a kind of muscle in the human jaw, the masseter, that contracts when a person is working very hard not to do something. I'd seen it before, in courtrooms, in briefing rooms, in the faces of men being told things they did not want to hear. Webb's meter was doing work. It was putting in overtime. Plus, it was carrying the whole structural weight of his professionalism on its own. The tourist leaned in. This was the moment. Not the horn was the preamble. This was the moment he got close enough that his London 2019 jacket sleeve actually grazed the wool of Webb's tunic, and he tilted his head toward Webb's ear, and, in a voice that carried across the forecourt, he said, "April Fools, mate. You're not real, are ya?" I stopped writing. Webb moved. Not much. Not dramatically. Not in any way that would have satisfied the tourist's friends, whose phones sagged slightly. With disappointment the instant they registered it wasn't a collapse or a shout or a shove. He turned sort of, his head, which just his head. The rest of him, the spine, the shoulders, the bearskin, the rifle at perfect dress, stayed exactly where it was. Only the head moved, with the slow mechanical precision of a gun turret finding its bearing, and he looked directly at the tourist. Not past him. Not through him. At him. I have interviewed men who have described being looked at by a royal guard during a formal challenge, and they all use variations of the same phrase. Like being seen for the first time by something that didn't like what it found. I always thought that was hyperbole. The tourist's face changed. It went through a sequence I have observed before in people who have miscalculated a situation: first the grin, residual, dying, then the blankness, the brain rebooting, then something smaller and more honest. Something that understood, without being told, that the person currently looking at it had stood in places this tourist would never stand, had held a line this tourist would never hold, and was extending right now, in this moment, a courtesy so enormous and so precisely controlled that it looked, from the outside, like nothing at all. The tourist stepped back. 1 step. Then, 2. Plus, his friends had gone quiet. Webb's head returned to forward. The movement took exactly as long as the first movement had. He was back at post. You know, spine, which shoulders. Rifle. 0846 hours. I wrote that down. I wrote, tourist group departed south toward the Victoria Memorial. No incident requiring escalation. Guard maintained full post discipline throughout. Then, I looked at the space where the tourist had been standing, at the faint scuff mark his shoe had left on the wet concrete when he'd stepped back, and I sat there for a moment with my pen hovering. The thing about Webb, the thing I didn't write in the log, the thing I kept turning over on the bus home, the thing I'm turning over now, is that he hadn't challenged the tourist in anger. He'd done it the way you move a fragile thing away from the edge of a shelf. Carefully. Without urgency. Because he'd actually known, before the tourist had, exactly how close to the edge they were standing. The form was called a P-114. Incident Documentation, Civilian Interaction, Forecourt. Plus, 3 pages. Carbon copy. I'd filled out 11 of them in 8 months on observation rotation, and every single one had been for something I privately considered a waste of 3 pages of carbon copy: a child who'd grabbed a railing, a drunk who'd tried to sing God Save the King at a guard post at 2 a.m, a journalist who'd argued with the gate staff about the definition of a public right-of-way. I started the P-114 for the Webb incident at my desk at 0922 and I stopped at 0923 because I realized I'd written 3 full sentences about the tourist's jacket and nothing substantive about the incident itself, which told me something was wrong with my head. I got up. Got tea. Came back. Here is the thing nobody tells you about observation duty: it turns you into a person who notices everything and understands almost nothing. You log. You timestamp, you develop a fluency in surfaces, the way a crowd disperses, the way a uniform sits on a person who's had a long night, the weight of a silence after a shouted order. You get very good at surfaces and you stay, professionally, permanently, on the outside of whatever is underneath them. Webb was underneath something. I'd known it before the tourist showed up. I'd known it in the way you know a weather system is coming before the temperature changes, a peripheral awareness, not a diagnosis. 11 months at the gates, 2 tours he never mentioned, a stillness that had a different quality to the other guard's stillness. Theirs was trained. His was arrived at. There's a difference, and I'd never been able to put words to the difference until that morning in the forecourt when he turned his head, and I'd seen it just for a half second, in the interval between the turn and the look landing, something cross his face that had no name in any report form I'd ever filled out. I wrote, "Guard demonstrated exemplary post-discipline under provocation." That was true. It was also roughly 70% of the actual event. I got up again. Went to find Dalton. Dalton's office smells like instant coffee and a specific brand of regret. He is a man who has made peace with paperwork in the way old soldiers make peace with old injuries, not happily, but completely. He looked at me over his reading glasses when I appeared in his doorway and said, "You've got your clipboard face on." "I always have my clipboard face on." "You've got your clipboard face on plus something else." I sat down. I told him about the incident in the same order I'd logged it, which is to say, chronologically and with appropriate professional detachment, and when I got to the part about the head turn I stopped and said, "I want to talk to Webb." Dalton took his glasses off. About how, for what it's worth, he's doing. He's doing his job. He's doing his job the way a man who hasn't slept in 3 days does his job, extremely precisely, because precision is the only thing keeping the structure up. Dalton looked at me for long enough that I started noticing the laminate peeling on the corner of his desk. Then, he said, "Webb submitted a welfare declaration in February. Isn't he known that? They don't share those with observation staff. Plus, he's being seen," Dalton said. "It's kind of being handled." By who? By the people whose job it's to handle it. That's not an answer. It's the only answer I've got that doesn't require you to sign a confidentiality form. He put his glasses back on. "What do you want me to tell you, Pemberton? That the man is carrying something?" Of course he's carrying something. They all carry something. That's not a revelation, that's a job description. I said nothing. Dalton's voice tbh went slightly quieter. "It doesn't happen often. What happened in the forecourt this morning, that wasn't Webb losing control? That was Webb having control. Of himself and of a situation that was asking him to not have it. You understand? The head turn was the control. Not the absence of it. I thought about the masseter. The jaw muscle, and the structural weight. He could have said nothing, I said. Could have just held post. Could have, Dalton agreed. Didn't. Why? Dalton looked at me with the flat patience of a man who has answered a question so many times it has become a kind of architecture in him. Because the tourist wasn't wrong. I didn't follow that. He said, "You're not real, are ya?" Dalton said it with more American than I'd expected from him. And Webb, who has been at those gates 11 months, Webb who filed a welfare declaration in February, Webb who stands in the rain and the wind and the bloody April cold being stared at and photographed and narrated over by people who see a costume and not a person. Webb looked at him. He picked up his pen and went back to his paperwork. That was his, I guess, answer, Dalton said. Plus, to the question. I went back to the P114 at 11:40. I wrote it properly this time. 3 pages. Carbon copy. Incident summarized, guard named, civilian behavior documented, escalation level assessed, nil. I wrote exemplary post-discipline again because it was the correct phrase and it was accurate, and then I signed it and put it in the out tray. Then I sat there, which there's a window in the observation office that faces north, away from the forecourt, toward the staff car park and a stretch of plane trees that had started budding, just barely, the very first suggestion of green on gray branches, the kind of color you've to argue with yourself about whether you're really seeing it. I thought about Webb standing out there right now in his bearskin. I thought about the tourist on the tube, replaying the video on his phone, deciding what the story was. Probably already had a version of it. Probably already had a caption. Trolled a royal guard lol. Or maybe, and I gave him more credit than he'd earned, but it cost me nothing, maybe he was sitting with something he couldn't caption yet. Though look. The slow, gun turret turn of a man who had decided to let himself be seen. I picked up my clipboard. I didn't write anything. I just held it. Outside, sort of, one of the plane trees dropped a small branch in the wind. It hit the car parked tarmac and nobody came to log it. I thought, some things don't need to be in the record to be true. I thought that, and then I went and got another cup of tea, and I left the branch where it was. 3 weeks later I saw the video. Someone had tagged the palace's official social media account in it. This happens more than people realize, as if accountability is something you can achieve. By CCING an institution, and a comms officer had flagged it to Dalton, who forwarded it to me with a message that said only, FYI. No action required. Plus, 47 seconds. Shot horizontally, to be fair, which meant the friend with the phone had made his peace with his artistic instincts. You could hear the horn from the first frame. You could see Webb in profile, bearskin, rifle, gray morning light turning the forecourt into something that looked like a 19th century engraving. Pretty much, I watched it twice. Then, I watched the moment on loop. 4 times. 6 and 8. Here is what the video captured, a guard turning his head. Here is what the video did not capture, anything that made it worth watching. The tourist had titled it Royal Guard Breaks April Fools when rolling on the floor laughing. It had 11,000 views. The comments were what comments always are, a mix of genuine delight, performative outrage, and at least 3 people explaining in exhaustive detail the legal parameters of civilian interaction with ceremonial military personnel, unprompted, to an audience that had not asked. 11,000 people had watched Webb turn his head and called it breaking. I closed the laptop. I requested a shift in my observation rotation the following Monday. Not a transfer, just a different assignment within the same building, closer to the forecourt. Dalton approved it without asking why, which meant he'd expected it. My new post was a ground floor station with a direct sightline to Webb's gate. I told myself this was professional. I logged it that way. Rotational reassignment, enhanced observation coverage, forecourt sector. Perfectly legitimate. Completely documented. I watched Webb for 11 days. What I was looking for, I couldn't have told you precisely. A crack in the stillness, maybe. A variation. Some evidence that the tourist had found a seam in the architecture and pulled at it, that Dalton sees being seen, its being handled was administrative comfort rather than operational truth. Eyed my clipboard. Eyed my timestamps. I was doing what I'd been trained to do, which was observe and log and trust the data. The data did not give me what I was looking for. What it gave me instead was Webb, which not the version I'd filed a P114 about. TBH, the longer version. Plus, the one that existed across 11 days of observation rather than 47 seconds of forecourt footage. 0803 Webb arriving for shift, not in uniform yet, in civvies, dark jacket, worn at the elbows, carrying a paper coffee cup with the sleeve askew. He fixed the sleeve before he went through the staff entrance. Small thing. Automatic. The cup mattered. 11:20, mid-morning crowd surge, tourists 3 deep at the railings. A child broke from her family and ran toward Webb's post, arms out like she was going to hug him, which children sometimes do, perhaps because from a distance a guard in a bearskin resembles a large toy soldier. The mother caught her with 4 feet to spare, apologizing across the forecourt in rapid German. Webb had tracked the child's path from the first step. His rifle hand had shifted 2 degrees. Not for the child, for the space beside the child, a hypothetical thing that might have been beside the child and wasn't. Protective reflex, preconscious. He didn't know he'd done it, and 16:15, end of shift. Webb coming off post in the way guards come off post, the formal march, the handover, the sequence of small ritual movements that closes the parenthesis of the duty cycle. And then, just past the gate, just out of the formal geometry of the post, his shoulders dropped. A centimeter. Maybe less, the weight of the bearskin redistributing. Or something else redistributing. I wrote 0803 through 1615. Nothing to report. On the 11th basically, day it rained. Not the apologetic British drizzle that everybody outside this country imagines when they imagine British weather, actual rain, purposeful and cold, the kind that finds the gap between your collar and your neck and gets there first. The tourists said actually, the railings lasted about 4 minutes before the umbrellas went up and the photo opportunities were reassessed. By 10 o'clock the forecourt was nearly empty. Webb stood in it. Rain on the bearskin. Rain on the tunic, and rain filling the small crease above the rifle sling and running down the barrel in a thin silver line. He stood in the way objects stand, without preference, without complaint, without the fundamental mammalian instinct to get out of the wet, and I watched him from behind a window and felt something I didn't immediately have a word for. I found one eventually. I think, embarrassed. Not of him. Actually, for myself. Kind of, 11 days of observation. 47 seconds of footage with 11,000 views. 3 pages of P114. A TBH, rotation reassignment. I dressed up as professional rigger. A whole architecture of documentation built around a man who had, in the end, done something very simple. He'd answered a question. You're not real, are ya? And he'd actually turned his head and said, yes I'm. Without words. Without breaking post. Without giving the tourist the reaction the tourist had driven across London to collect. He'd said it in the only language available to him, the slow mechanical precision of a man operating inside constraints so tight that the smallest movement becomes the loudest possible statement. I put down the clipboard. I didn't log the rain. I didn't log Webb's shoulders at 16:15 or the child or the coffee cup with the askew sleeve. I didn't build a case out of them, didn't construct an argument, didn't route it to Dalton with a recommendation. I sat with it, and, outside, the rain eased. The forecourt emptied itself of puddles and the patient way stone does, and the tourists came back with their phones and their children and their London 2019 jackets. Webb stood at his post, and I watched him, and nobody who looked at him in that moment would have known that 3 weeks ago he had done something extraordinary. That's the thing about discipline from the inside. It doesn't honestly look like anything. The next morning there was a new file on my desk. Unlabeled. Dalton's handwriting on a post-it attached to the front, when you're done observing, come talk to me. I picked it up. Held TBH it a moment without opening it. Through the window, Webb was coming on shift. Dark jacket, worn elbows, paper coffee cup, he fixed the sleeve. I opened the file.